If love were a performance, Chinedu Okafor would have won every award in Lagos. At least that was what everyone believed. If you're new to this channel, just subscribe now, and say it in the comment section. Every Sunday morning when Adaeze and Chinedu walked into church together, heads turned with admiration. Women whispered to each other, men nodded respectfully, and the older couple smiled as if they were watching the kind of marriage people prayed for but rarely found. Chinedu would hold Adaeze's hand gently as they walked down the aisle. Sometimes he would lean close and whisper something that made her laugh softly. Other times he would pull her chair out for her or brush invisible dust from her dress. "My queen deserves the best," he liked to say. And people loved him for it. To outsiders, they were the perfect couple. 6 years of marriage, no loud arguments, no public drama, no scandal. Their house in Lekki was warm and beautiful, decorated with cream sofas, family photos, and fresh flowers Chinedu brought home almost every Friday. "Your husband is rare," Adaeze's best friend Ifunanya often said. "Where did you even find this man?" Adaeze would smile politely. "I got lucky," she always replied. But lately, that answer felt like a lie she was telling herself. Because something had changed. It wasn't obvious. Not the kind of change anyone outside their home would notice. Chinedu still bought flowers. He still called her "my queen." He still kissed her forehead before leaving for work. But Adaeze had started noticing the spaces between those gestures. The silence. The distance. Small things began to stand out. Like the way he sometimes sat on the couch late at night staring at his phone, his face glowing in the dim light while his fingers moved quickly across the screen. The way he would tilt the phone slightly away whenever she walked past. Or how he had started taking business calls outside the house. At first, she ignored it. Marriage had seasons, her mother used to say. Sometimes people became busy. Sometimes work demanded more attention. Sometimes men carried burdens they didn't want to worry their wives with. Adaeze tried to believe that. But doubt was a stubborn seed. Once it found a place in your mind, it started growing quietly. One evening, Adaeze was setting the dining table when Chinedu walked in through the front door. "You're late," she said, glancing at the clock. "It's almost 9. "Traffic," he replied quickly, dropping his car keys on the table. Adaeze studied him carefully. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his face looked tired. There was sweat on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Lagos traffic again?" she asked. Chinedu forced a small smile. "You know this city. Sometimes it feels like everyone decided to drive at the same time." She nodded slowly. But something about his voice felt rehearsed. During dinner, he barely spoke. Normally Chinedu liked telling stories about his day, clients he met, funny moments at the office, even random things he saw on the road. That night he ate quietly. Adaeze watched him carefully. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. Chinedu looked up. "Of course. Why?" "You just seem distracted." He shrugged. "Just work stress." Adaeze nodded again, but inside, the uneasiness deepened. Later that night, she woke up thirsty and walked toward the kitchen. As she passed the living room, she heard Chinedu's voice. He was whispering. Adaeze stopped. "Please, just give me a little more time," he was saying quietly. Silence followed. Then he spoke again. "I said I'll handle it." Adaeze felt a cold feeling spread through her chest. "Handle what?" She stepped into the room. Chinedu immediately ended the call. "Oh," he said quickly. "You're awake." Adaeze crossed her arms. "Who were you talking to?" "Office," he replied. "At midnight." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Different time zones." Adaeze stared at him. Something inside her was starting to whisper a dangerous question. What if everything she believed about her marriage wasn't real? The next few weeks only made things worse. Chinedu began coming home later than usual. Some nights it was 10. Other nights it was even closer to midnight. When Adaeze asked about it, the answer was always the same. Work. Then came the business trips. The first one was Abuja. Just 2 days, he said while packing his suitcase. Adaeze sat on the bed watching him. You didn't mention this before. It came up suddenly. That answer bothered her? But she said nothing. 2 weeks later, there was another trip. This time to Port Harcourt. Again, sudden. Again, unexplained. Adaeze tried convincing herself she was overthinking. But the human heart had a strange ability to sense when something was wrong. One Saturday afternoon, Adaeze was visiting Ifunanya. They sat on the balcony drinking zobo while the Lagos sun glowed softly across the street. You look troubled, Ifunanya said, studying her. Adaeze sighed. I think something is wrong with Chinedu. Ifunanya leaned forward. Wrong how? Adaeze hesitated before speaking. He's distant. Always on his phone. Always busy. And he keeps traveling suddenly. Ifunanya frowned. Have you asked him directly? Yes. And? He says it's work. Ifunanya remained quiet for a moment. Then she spoke carefully. Adaeze, sometimes when a man starts behaving differently like that. She didn't finish the sentence. But Adaeze understood. Cheating. The word hung in the air like poison. Adaeze shook her head quickly. No. Chinedu wouldn't do that. Are you sure? Adaeze didn't answer. That night, lying in bed beside her sleeping husband, Adaeze stared at the ceiling. Her mind replayed every strange moment from the past few months. The phone calls. The late nights. The secretive behavior. The trips. Her chest felt tight. She turned slightly and studied Chinedu's face in the darkness. He looked peaceful. Innocent. The same man she had fallen in love with years ago. Memories flooded her mind. Their first meeting at a friend's wedding. The way he nervously asked for her number. The small apartment they shared when they were newly married. The promises they made to each other. Could that man really be lying to her now? Adaeze closed her eyes. But sleep refused to come. Instead, a dangerous thought began forming in her mind. What if she stopped asking questions? And simply watched? What if she forced the truth to reveal itself? The idea scared her at first. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Because if Chinedu was hiding something, he would never admit it openly. She would have to see it herself. Over the next few days, the idea grew stronger. Until one morning, something unexpected happened. Adaeze was in the bathroom when her foot slipped slightly on the wet floor. She grabbed the sink quickly and caught herself. But in that brief moment, a plan suddenly formed in her mind. A bold, dangerous, almost crazy plan. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. What if, she whispered softly. Her heart started beating faster. It would be the perfect test. If Chinedu truly loved her, the truth would reveal itself. And if he didn't, then she would finally know. Adaeze took a deep breath. Then she looked at her reflection again. I'm going to find out who my husband really is. The accident happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Or at least, that was how it looked to Chinedu. Adaeze had spent the entire morning preparing for it. She moved through the house slowly, carefully placing small details exactly where they needed to be. The bathroom floor was lightly wet, just enough to make the story believable. A small bottle of shampoo lay on its side near the bathtub. Her heart was beating faster than usual. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at her reflection for a long moment. You're really doing this, she whispered to herself. For a second, doubt crept in. What if she was wrong about Chinedu? What if she was destroying the trust in their marriage for nothing? But then she remembered the late-night phone calls. The whispered conversations. The business trips that appeared from nowhere. The doubt returned like a heavy cloud. Adaeze closed her eyes briefly. If you love me, she murmured softly, this will prove it. A few minutes later, she heard the front door open. Chinedu had come home earlier than usual. Adaeze, he called from the living room. She took a deep breath. This is it. She let her foot slide on the wet tile and deliberately knocked a small stool against the wall. The loud crash echoed through the house. Adaeze! Chinedu shouted. She quickly lowered herself to the floor and closed her eyes. His footsteps thundered down the hallway. Adaeze! What happened? He rushed into the bathroom and dropped beside her, panic filling his voice. Oh my God! He gently lifted her head. Adaeze, can you hear me? She remained still. Chinedu's hands were shaking now. Stay with me, he whispered desperately. Within minutes he had wrapped a towel around her head and rushed her to the car. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove through traffic toward the nearest hospital. Please be okay, he kept muttering under his breath. Adaeze lay quietly in the passenger seat, eyes closed, listening. The fear in his voice felt real. A small part of her heart twisted painfully. But the test had already begun. At the hospital, nurses rushed Adaeze into a small examination room. A doctor in his late 50s checked her pulse, examined her pupils, and asked several questions. Chinedu stood nearby, restless and worried. Doctor, is she going to be okay? The doctor gave a calm nod. She seems stable. But head injuries can sometimes affect memory or cause confusion. Chinedu swallowed. What do we do? We wake her and ask a few questions. Adaeze felt the doctor gently tap her shoulder. Madam, can you hear me? She slowly opened her eyes. The bright hospital lights made her squint slightly. Where am I? She asked weakly. You're in the hospital, the doctor said kindly. You had a small accident. Adaeze pretended to look confused. Accident? Chinedu stepped forward quickly. Adaeze, it's me. She turned her head slowly toward him. Then she frowned. The doctor watched carefully. Do you know who this man is? He asked. Adaeze stared at Chinedu as if seeing him for the first time. Her expression slowly filled with uncertainty. Then she shook her head slightly. I've never seen him before. The room became completely silent. Chinedu's face froze. What? Adaeze looked away from him nervously. Who is he? The doctor frowned thoughtfully. Interesting. Chinedu grabbed the doctor's arm. What do you mean interesting? She's my wife. The doctor remained calm. It appears she may have temporary memory loss. Chinedu's eyes widened. Memory loss? It can happen after head injuries. Sometimes patients forget certain people or events. Chinedu looked back at Adaeze in disbelief. Adaeze, it's me. Chinedu. She stared at him blankly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know you. Those words hit him like a physical blow. He stepped back slowly. Adaeze watched him from the corner of her eye. His pain looked real. Too real. For a brief moment, guilt stabbed her chest. But she forced herself to stay in character. The doctor spoke again. This might only be temporary. We'll monitor her for a few days. Chinedu ran his hands through his hair. This can't be happening. The doctor turned to Adaeze again. Do you remember your name? She nodded slowly. Adaeze. And the year? 2024. Good, the doctor said. That means most of your memory is intact. Chinedu sat down heavily on a chair. So why doesn't she remember me? Memory works in complicated ways, the doctor replied. Sometimes emotional connections are affected first. Those words pierced through Chinedu's heart. Emotional connections. Adaeze watched his reaction carefully. The pain on his face looked genuine. But the real test hadn't even started yet. Later that evening, Chinedu drove Adaeze home. The car ride was quiet. Adaeze stared out the window like a confused stranger while Chinedu kept glancing at her nervously. When they arrived at the house, he helped her out of the car gently. Careful, he said softly. She allowed him to guide her inside. The familiar living room suddenly felt like a stage. Every picture on the wall told a story of their life together. Wedding photos. Vacation pictures. Family celebrations. Adaeze walked slowly around the room, pretending to see everything for the first time. Do I live here? She asked quietly. Chinedu nodded. Yes. This is our home. She looked at a framed wedding picture. The bride and groom were smiling brightly. She pointed at it. Is that me? Yes, Chinedu said softly. And you? He nodded again. Adaeze tilted her head. We're married. Yes. She looked down at her hand and noticed the wedding ring. Oh. Silence filled the room. Chinedu looked like a man whose world had suddenly collapsed. Adaeze almost wanted to stop the test right there. But she forced herself to continue. Later that night, Chinedu prepared dinner. Adaeze sat at the table quietly watching him move around the kitchen. He placed a plate of jollof rice and chicken in front of her. This is your favorite, he said. She tasted it carefully. It's good. He smiled weakly. I'm glad. They ate in silence. Every movement between them felt strange now. Two people who had shared 6 years of marriage suddenly behaving like strangers. When dinner ended, Chinedu stood up slowly. The doctor said you should rest. Adaeze nodded. He walked her to the bedroom. She paused at the door. Do we sleep in the same room? Chinedu hesitated. Yes. But if you're uncomfortable. I'll sleep here, she said. He nodded quietly. Adaeze lay on the bed while Chinedu sat in a chair nearby. She pretended to fall asleep. But her mind was fully awake. Around midnight, Chinedu's phone vibrated. Adaeze kept her eyes closed. He stood up quietly and walked out of the room. Moments later, she heard his voice in the living room. Whispering. Just like before. Adaeze slowly opened her eyes. The test had officially begun. And now, she would watch everything. Every word. Every secret. Every truth her husband never thought she would discover. The house felt different now. Even though nothing had physically changed, Adaeze noticed how the atmosphere between her and Chinedu had shifted. Every conversation carried a strange awkwardness, like two strangers trying to navigate a life that once belonged to them both. But for Adaeze, the awkwardness was part of the plan. For Chinedu, it was heartbreak. The next morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the bedroom. Adaeze slowly opened her eyes and stretched slightly, pretending to wake up in an unfamiliar place. Chinedu was already awake. He sat in a chair beside the bed, his elbows resting on his knees, watching her carefully as though afraid she might disappear if he blinked. When she noticed him, she flinched slightly. Oh, you're here. Chinedu forced a gentle smile. Good morning. She looked around the room again as if everything was still strange to her. I still don't remember anything, she said softly. Chinedu nodded slowly. That's okay. His voice carried patience, but Adaeze could hear the exhaustion hiding behind it. You don't have to rush. The doctor said it might take time. She studied his face carefully. You seem very worried about me. He let out a quiet laugh. I should be. Why? Chinedu paused. Then he pointed at the wedding picture on the bedside table. Because you're my wife. Adaeze picked up the picture and stared at it. The photo showed them on their wedding day, her wearing a white lace dress and Chinedu standing proudly beside her in a fitted suit. They looked happy. Radiantly happy. She turned the frame slightly toward him. We look close. We were, Chinedu said gently. His voice carried a softness that almost made her feel guilty. Almost. Later that morning, Chinedu prepared breakfast. Adaeze sat at the kitchen counter watching him like an outsider observing a man she barely knew. He moved around the kitchen with familiar ease, frying eggs and warming bread. You cook? She asked curiously. Chinedu smiled faintly. You used to say I was the best breakfast chef in Lagos. She tilted her head. I did? Yes. He placed the plate in front of her. You especially loved my scrambled eggs. She tasted a small bite. They're good. Chinedu looked relieved. For a moment they ate quietly. Then Adaeze decided to test something. So, how did we meet? Chinedu's face brightened slightly. At a wedding. Oh. Yes. You were the bride's cousin. And you? I was the groom's friend. Adaeze leaned forward. And you just fell in love with me. Chinedu chuckled softly. Not immediately. What happened then? He wiped his hands on a napkin. You rejected me 3 times. Adaeze blinked in surprise. I did? Yes. Why? You said I talked too much. She laughed slightly. That sounds like something I would say. Chinedu's smile widened. For the first time since the accident, the tension between them eased a little. But as the day went on, Adaeze continued observing him carefully. She watched how he checked on her every few minutes. How he reminded her to drink water. How he patiently answered the same questions again and again without frustration. In the afternoon, he brought out an old photo album. Maybe this will help, he said gently. Adaeze sat beside him on the couch as he opened it. The pages were filled with memories. Their engagement party. Their honeymoon in Zanzibar. Family gatherings. Birthday celebrations. Adaeze turned each page slowly, pretending to search her mind for recognition. But inside, she remembered everything. Every moment. Every smile. Every promise. And strangely, seeing those memories again made the test feel heavier. Chinedu pointed at one photo of them laughing at a beach. You loved that trip, he said. Adaeze looked at the picture carefully. You seem very happy with me. I was, he replied. She glanced at him. Were. Chinedu quickly corrected himself. I mean. I still am. She nodded slowly. But something about his correction stayed in her mind. That evening, Adaeze noticed something strange again. Chinedu's phone buzzed repeatedly. Each time it vibrated, he looked at the screen quickly and then locked it again. Finally, she asked casually, Are those work messages? Chinedu hesitated slightly. Yes. Your job seems very busy. It is. She leaned back on the couch. You must be very important. He laughed quietly. I wish that were true. The phone buzzed again. This time Chinedu stood up. I'll take this outside. Adaeze watched him walk toward the front door. As soon as he stepped outside, his voice dropped to a whisper. Adaeze slowly stood and moved closer to the window. She couldn't hear everything clearly. But she heard enough. Yes. I know, Chinedu was saying quietly. There was a pause. No. Not yet. Another pause. Please, just give me more time. Adae's stomach tightened. More time for what? When Chinedu returned inside, he forced a smile again. Just work. Adae nodded slowly. But the suspicion in her mind grew stronger. Later that night, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the gate. Chinedu looked confused. Were you expecting someone? Adae asked. No. He walked outside. Adae quietly followed and stood near the door. A woman stood at the gate. She was tall, confident, and dressed in a fitted office outfit. Her hair was neatly styled and she carried a handbag on her shoulder. Adae froze when she heard the woman speak. Chinedu. Chinedu's face immediately changed. Sandra. The woman sighed with frustration. I've been trying to reach you all day. Adae stepped outside slowly. Chinedu noticed her immediately. Oh. Adae. Sandra's eyes moved toward her. And who is this? Chinedu hesitated. This is my wife. Sandra raised her eyebrows in surprise. Your wife? Adae pretended to look confused. She turned to Chinedu. Do I know her? Chinedu spoke quickly. No. She's just someone from work. Sandra looked at him sharply. But she said nothing. Adae noticed the tension between them instantly. It was subtle. But it was there. Sandra folded her arms. We need to talk. Chinedu glanced nervously toward Adae. Not now. Sandra lowered her voice. It's important. Adae watched both of them carefully. Then she spoke innocently. It's okay. They both turned to her. If she works with you, maybe she can help me remember things. Sandra studied Adae's face carefully. You don't remember him? Adae shook her head. No. Sandra looked back at Chinedu. And for the briefest moment, something strange flashed across her face. Almost like surprise. Or pity. Chinedu cleared his throat. She had an accident. Sandra nodded slowly. I see. Then she turned toward the gate again. We'll talk later. Chinedu walked her out quickly. Adae stood quietly in the doorway watching them. Their conversation at the gate was too quiet to hear. But their body language said everything. Tension. Urgency. Secrets. When Chinedu returned inside, Adae asked gently. She seems very concerned about you. Chinedu rubbed his forehead. Just work problems. Adae nodded slowly. But deep inside, her instincts were screaming louder than ever. The test she had started was becoming more complicated than she expected. Because now there was another piece of the puzzle. A woman named Sandra. And whatever connection she had with Chinedu, it clearly wasn't simple. By the fourth night of her memory loss, Adae had learned something important. Pretending to forget someone was far more difficult than she expected. Not because the acting was hard, but because watching Chinedu struggle with her absence was quietly breaking her heart. He was trying. That much was obvious. Every morning he patiently answered the same questions she asked again and again. Where do I keep my clothes? Which side of the bed do I sleep on? Who are the people in these pictures? Each time he explained gently, never showing irritation. But Adae could see the sadness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. And yet, something still didn't add up. Because despite his kindness, the late-night whispers continued. And Sandra's sudden appearance had only deepened the mystery. That evening after dinner, Adae sat quietly on the couch pretending to read a magazine. Chinedu stood near the window, checking his phone again. The screen lit up briefly. Adae noticed the name, Sandra. Chinedu immediately locked the phone. I'm stepping out for a bit, he said. At this hour? Adaeze asked. Just for a quick meeting. With work? Yes. Adaeze nodded slowly. Okay. But inside, her decision had already been made. Tonight she would stop guessing. Tonight she would follow him. Chinedu left the house 10 minutes later. Adaeze waited patiently until the sound of his car faded into the distance. Then she stood up quickly. Her heart was racing. What if I'm wrong, she whispered to herself. But curiosity had already taken control. She grabbed her handbag, slipped on her shoes, and quietly stepped outside. Fortunately, Lagos traffic worked in her favor. Chinedu's car was only a few vehicles ahead as she followed at a careful distance. The city lights reflected across the road as cars moved steadily through the evening. Adaeze gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her thoughts raced wildly. Maybe he was meeting Sandra. Maybe they were lovers. Maybe the perfect husband everyone admired had been lying all along. The idea made her stomach twist painfully. After about 15 minutes, Chinedu's car turned into the parking lot of a quiet restaurant. Adaeze slowed down. Her heart pounded harder. She parked across the street and watched carefully. Moments later, Sandra arrived. She stepped out of a taxi and walked confidently into the restaurant. Adaze's chest tightened. So it was true. Chinedu entered a few seconds later. Adaeze waited before following. When she stepped inside, the restaurant was dimly lit and mostly quiet. Perfect for private conversations. She quickly found a seat near the back where she could see them clearly without being noticed. Chinedu and Sandra sat at a table near the window. Sandra leaned forward immediately. You're late. I came as fast as I could, Chinedu replied. Adaeze leaned closer, straining to hear. Sandra crossed her arms. This situation is getting worse. Chinedu sighed heavily. I know. Then why haven't you told her yet? Adaze's heart skipped a beat. Told her what? Chinedu rubbed his face tiredly. Because I don't want her to worry. Sandra shook her head in frustration. She deserves to know. Chinedu looked down at the table. Adaeze could see the exhaustion on his face clearly now. I'm handling it, he said quietly. How? Sandra demanded. You're working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, and now she doesn't even remember you. Adaeze froze. 2 jobs? Sandra continued speaking, her voice sharp with concern. You can't keep doing this alone. Chinedu shook his head slowly. I have to. Why? Chinedu hesitated. Then he said something that made Adaze's chest tighten. Because her father was right. Sandra frowned. What are you talking about? Chinedu leaned back in his chair. You remember what he said to me before our wedding? Sandra's expression softened slightly. He didn't mean it. Yes, he did. Adaze's breath caught. Her father? Chinedu continued quietly. He told me I wasn't rich enough for his daughter. That one day she would regret marrying me. Sandra sighed. That was years ago. But I never forgot. Chinedu's voice dropped lower. So I started saving. Working harder. Taking extra contracts at night. Sandra stared at him in disbelief. For 6 months. Chinedu nodded. I wanted to surprise her. I was planning to expand the business, buy her the house she always dreamed of. Adaeze felt her eyes burn with sudden tears. She had no idea. Sandra shook her head again. You should have told her. Chinedu laughed softly. And admit her father was right. Your pride is going to destroy you. Chinedu remained silent for a moment. Then he spoke again. It doesn't matter now anyway. Why? He stared down at the table. Because she doesn't even remember loving me. Adae's chest tightened painfully. Sandra studied him carefully. Then she said something unexpected. She's planning to leave you. Chinedu looked up. What? I overheard her talking to a friend last week, Sandra said. She was saying something about testing you. Adae's heart nearly stopped. Sandra continued. She wanted to see if you were hiding something. Chinedu looked stunned. She thought I was cheating. Sandra shrugged slightly. Maybe. Chinedu leaned back slowly, absorbing the information. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed quietly. It wasn't an angry laugh. It was tired. Almost sad. Well, he said softly, I guess she doesn't have to test anything now. Sandra looked confused. What do you mean? Chinedu looked toward the window. His voice became gentle. If she decides to leave, I won't stop her. Sandra frowned. You're just giving up. No. Then what? Chinedu smiled faintly. I'll still love her. Sandra stared at him. Even if she forgets you forever. Chinedu nodded slowly. Yes. Adae felt tears sliding down her cheeks. He continued speaking quietly. She gave me the best 6 years of my life. That's more than enough. Sandra shook her head in disbelief. You're unbelievable. Chinedu shrugged lightly. Maybe. They continued talking, but Adae could barely hear anything else. Her heart was pounding loudly in her chest. Everything she thought she knew about the situation had just shattered. All the late nights. All the secret phone calls. All the sudden trips. It wasn't betrayal. It was sacrifice. And the man she had been secretly testing had been silently fighting to prove he deserved her. Adae slowly stood up. Her legs felt weak as she walked out of the restaurant. The night air felt cooler now. She sat inside her car and wiped her tears. Her mind replayed Chinedu's words again and again. Even if she forgets me forever, I'll still love her. The weight of her deception suddenly felt unbearable. She had started this test looking for proof of betrayal. Instead, she had discovered something far deeper and far more painful. The truth about her husband's love. Adae did not remember driving home. The entire journey back felt like a blur of headlights, distant horns, and the quiet pounding of her heart against her chest. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Everything she believed about the past few weeks had been wrong. Every suspicion. Every silent accusation. Every sleepless night spent imagining betrayal. Instead of cheating, Chinedu had been exhausting himself trying to build a better future for them. And she had been testing him. The thought made her chest tighten painfully. When she arrived home, the house was quiet. She stepped inside slowly and sat on the couch. The same couch where she had pretended not to recognize him. The same couch where he had patiently explained their life together. Adae buried her face in her hands. What have I done? She whispered. The clock on the wall ticked softly as minutes passed. Her mind replayed the conversation from the restaurant again and again. Her father's words. Chinedu working 2 jobs. Sandra trying to convince him to tell the truth. And the sentence that refused to leave her mind. Even if she forgets me forever, I'll still love her. Adae wiped her eyes. She had never felt so ashamed. For 6 years, Chinedu had loved her openly. Yet when doubt entered her heart, she had chosen deception instead of trust. The sound of a car pulling into the compound interrupted her thoughts. Chinedu was home. Adae quickly wiped the remaining tears from her face and sat up straight. The front door opened. Chinedu stepped inside quietly. He looked tired. His shoulders were slightly slumped, and there were faint shadows under his eyes. But when he saw her sitting on the couch, he forced a small smile. "You're still awake?" Adaeze nodded slowly. "I couldn't sleep." Chinedu walked into the living room and placed his phone on the table. "Did you take your medication?" "Yes." He nodded. "Good." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than ever. Adaeze looked at him carefully. The man she had been doubting was standing right in front of her. Still caring. Still trying. Still loving her. The guilt inside her chest grew unbearable. "Chinedu," she said softly. He looked up. "Yes?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I need to tell you something." Chinedu pulled a chair and sat across from her. "What is it?" Adaeze took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. There was no turning back now. "I remember everything." Chinedu blinked. "What?" "I never lost my memory," she said quietly. The room became completely silent. Chinedu stared at her as if trying to understand what he had just heard. "I don't understand." Adaeze clasped her hands together nervously. The accident, it was real, but the memory loss wasn't. His eyebrows slowly pulled together. "You're saying you were pretending?" Adaeze nodded. "Yes." Chinedu leaned back slightly in his chair. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Adaeze could see the confusion in his eyes. Then he asked slowly, "Why?" The question felt heavier than any accusation. Adaeze lowered her gaze. "Because I thought you were hiding something from me." Chinedu let out a quiet breath. "So you decided to test me?" "Yes." She forced herself to continue. "I thought you might be cheating. The late nights, the phone calls, the trips, everything made me suspicious." Chinedu rubbed his forehead slowly. "And instead of asking me directly, you pretended to forget me." Adaeze nodded weakly. "Yes." Silence filled the room again. Adaeze braced herself for anger. For shouting. For accusations. But none of that came. Instead, Chinedu suddenly laughed. It was a soft, tired laugh. Adaeze looked up in surprise. "You forgot me just to see if I loved you," he said. Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry." Chinedu shook his head slowly. "You could have just asked." "I know." Her voice broke slightly. "I know that now." She hesitated before speaking again. "I followed you tonight." Chinedu's eyes widened slightly. "You what?" "I saw you at the restaurant with Sandra." He stared at her. "You heard everything?" Adaeze nodded. "Yes." Chinedu leaned back in his chair again, clearly processing everything. "So you know about the second job?" "Yes." "And the savings?" "Yes." His expression softened slightly. Adaeze wiped her eyes again. "I didn't know you were doing all that for us." Chinedu shrugged lightly. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was," she insisted. "You were exhausting yourself." He looked down briefly. "I just wanted to prove something." "You didn't have to prove anything to me." Chinedu looked up at her. "I wasn't trying to prove it to you." Adaeze frowned slightly. "Then who?" He smiled faintly. "Myself." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. Adaeze stood up slowly and walked toward him. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I let doubt destroy my trust." Chinedu looked at her quietly. "Marriage is not easy," he said. "Sometimes we all get scared." Adaeze knelt beside his chair. "But I hurt you. You didn't know the truth. I should have trusted you." Chinedu studied her face for a moment. Then he reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Next time," he said softly, "just ask." Adaeze let out a small, emotional laugh. "Deal." He stood up from the chair and pulled her into a warm embrace. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension that had been building for weeks slowly melted away. Adaeze rested her head against his chest. "I heard what you said at the restaurant," she whispered. Chinedu frowned slightly. "What part?" "Even if she forgets me forever, I'll still love her." Chinedu sighed softly. "Well, it's true." Adaeze tightened her arms around him. "You're stubborn." He smiled. "And you're dramatic." She laughed through her tears. "That's fair." They stayed like that for several quiet moments. Then Adaeze stepped back slightly. "So what happens now?" Chinedu looked around the living room. The same house. The same memories. But something felt lighter now. "We start being honest with each other," he said. "No more secrets." Adaeze nodded firmly. "No more tests." Chinedu smiled. "Good." Adaeze took his hand gently. For the first time in weeks, the distance between them had completely disappeared. And in that quiet living room, they both understood something powerful. Love didn't need to be tested. It only needed to be trusted.